Logan Paul versus Dillon Danis, a huge fight, a huge build-up that's happening on October 14th on the Misfits Boxing Prime card. The people's main event at this point, as there's huge drama. This fight has really gotten personal. And here's my full breakdown on Logan Paul versus Dillon Danis. So on paper, most of the physical advantages do favor Logan Paul. He's 2 years younger than Dillon, 1 inch taller. In their last fights, Logan Paul weighed in at 190 pounds, while Dillon Danis weighed in at 175 pounds. Logan has a longer reach by 3 inches, and obviously in the boxing ring, he's more experienced with 3 fights compared to Dillon making his debut. Dillon was scheduled to fight KSI at the beginning of this year, and that fight ended up falling through. A lot of people think this fight will also fall through, but Dillon Danis is the real fighter. He's pretty much been fighting his whole life. He's 2-0 in MMA. He fought in Bellator. His last fight, though, was in 2019. It's been a while since we've actually seen him in the ring. He's been out with injuries. Meanwhile, Logan Paul is taking up the WWE since his last fight against Floyd Mayweather in 2021. He's a showman. He's very athletic, but he hasn't been too disciplined in boxing, compared to someone like his brother Jake Paul, who's been fighting non-stop consistently multiple times a year. Both these guys are very polarizing, controversial figures. Dillon Danis has no limits. This guy is a complete menace. He's a notorious online troll, but obviously a lot of people hate him because he hasn't been fighting. This isn't a boxing match. It's not an MMA, which would definitely make these very different. Dillon Danis, a jiu-jitsu guy, an MMA fighter, transitioning into boxing, and historically that hasn't been panning out well for a lot of guys. But in boxing, he's not going up against Muhammad Ali. We're talking about Logan Paul, but he is still tall, athletic, and has a pretty decent size advantage over Dillon Danis. This is their physique side by side, and obviously Logan Paul, the much leaner guy. This fight is going to be at 195 pounds, 20 pounds more than Dillon last fought, and 5 pounds more than Logan last fought. In terms of boxing skill, Logan Paul has a decent jab, and that's the most important punch in boxing. The jab can take you around the world. He's a big guy, so obviously he has power, but he does throw a lot of arm punches. He has a low hand style where he kind of keeps his guard towards his waist, and he has good reaction, so he uses that upper body movement to get out of the way of punches, but it's definitely not perfect. Even though Logan does have a solid jab, a lot of his fights do tend to be boring. He has that wrestling background, that pedigree, and he's very clinch heavy. We saw that especially in his last fight against Floyd Mayweather. That's how he was able to survive the fight. He clinched Floyd, he made it rough. He leaned that about 40-pound size advantage onto Floyd, who's a much smaller guy, and he imposed that game plan pretty well in that fight. But it's hard to measure his level when you're going up against TBE, one of the best boxers of all time, in Floyd Mayweather. Logan kind of lacks committing to a lot of his shots. In his second fight against KSI, he didn't have much success, especially with his right hand. He barely threw it, he barely used it. He was very negative in that fight, kind of just running the whole time, just popping that jab out there. Meanwhile, KSI was walking him forward, trying to get on the inside, trying to make it a dogfight. And he had success. He won the fight by a split decision, and Logan Paul really just did not show up that night. He has that natural athleticism, but so far hasn't necessarily really translated too much into boxing. This fight against Dillon Danis is supposed to be a statement maker. He wants to put a statement, a beating on Dillon Danis, especially after all this trash talk that has been happening. Dillon Danis really just doesn't care. But in terms of his actual skills, we don't know how he looks in a pure boxing match. He's never had a boxing match before. He's fought in MMA. In those fights, his striking was very subpar. He lacks a good guard, really any striking prowess. But it's not like he was trying to stand and trade with those guys. He just wanted to get them onto the ground to submit them with jiu-jitsu. That's what he's best at. That's what he knows. It's how he wins fights. But against Logan Paul, he can't do that. He can't go to the ground. He can't put him in submissions, even though Nate Diaz did pull that standing guillotine on Jake Paul. You never know at this point with Dillon Danis. I mean, he's already taken it far, but for Dillon, he's probably going to want to come on the inside and make this a dogfight, make it rough, kind of what KSI did, but different. With him also being a grappler, he's probably also going to have a lot of clinch work that he's going to look to utilize and impose himself. In a lot of his boxing sparring footage, we see him kind of smothering his work, coming on the inside, throwing combinations in different angles, and Dillon Danis is actually a southpaw. Logan Paul's never fought a southpaw. He's only fought orthodox fighters, and KSI and Floyd Mayweather, his only 2 opponents to date. So it's going to be a completely different style, and Dillon Danis has been trash talking all kinds of guys for so many years. You gotta think at least he's been training boxing for a while. With how much he's talked, he actually now has to show up and back it up in this fight. So I feel like he is going to come in prepared. He's going to have a full training camp. Conor McGregor said that he wants to train Dillon Danis, and Conor guaranteed that Dillon Danis will win this. Dillon Danis has to come forward and pressure Logan. He can't really let him start early and get that momentum. But a big change here is that this fight has gone from 6 to now 8 rounds. This fight is now more rounds than the main event of KSI versus Tommy Fury. This is literally the people's main event. Obviously both are big fights, but this one just has so much going into it. Dillon's a huge underdog in this fight. Logan Paul's like minus 1,000. The odds makers pretty much give Dillon Danis no chance. There was literally a betting line that he was the favorite to pull out of this fight and not show up. So Dillon Danis' track record, to say the least, is not great. But the guy's really a grappler to his core, so why not use that in the boxing ring? Logan Paul's best work in this fight will probably be boxing out of range. keeping his distance, keep measuring, probing with that jab, setting up big shots and trying to counter Dillon Danis coming forward. We saw him obviously plant a huge uppercut on KSI in their rematch that dropped him. The illegal shots that followed probably don't need to come back in this fight because he has that power. He can shoot that right hand, he can put everything into his punches, but he usually just stays on the back foot. Doesn't commit, kind of comes in with slapping hooks when he does. Against Floyd Mayweather though, we kind of saw a mentality switch for Logan Paul. He was more loose, kind of just having more fun, taking it less seriously, which is what I feel like suits best for him. He's a showman, looking to put on the biggest fights, looking to be on the biggest stages. This is the prime card. He wants to make his moment, obviously. But besides that, we need to see a prime Logan Paul in the ring. A big thing going into this fight could be Logan Paul's mentality. How's he going to approach this fight? And even how will those mind games between him and Dillon Danis play out in the ring? Dillon Danis is looking to get under the skin of Logan Paul. Dillon got his fiance involved, has brought up crypto scams, everything under the sun with Logan Paul, the suicide forest. This rivalry has actually been going on for years and years. Since Logan Paul fought KSI, he was calling out Dillon Danis to fight him in boxing. They finally get to settle it here, and you gotta wonder, is that pressure going to get to Logan Paul? He needs to win this. This is supposed to be a tune-up fight, and especially after everything that has been said, you need to shut this guy up. You need to go out there and put damage onto Dillon Danis. You gotta wonder how the 8 rounds could come into factor actually in this fight technically. In a couple of his fights now, Logan Paul seems to gas out. In his first fight against KSI, we saw that immediately. He had good success early, but just that adrenaline dump. Even against Floyd Mayweather, he slowed down a couple rounds in, but did have a kind of second wind. Where towards the end, he was still looking strong, but Dillon Danis is probably going to be a pressure fighter. Technically wise, Dillon Danis doesn't have the most pop to his punches, and he's not the strongest, he's not the hardest hitter, he's not the fastest, he doesn't have the best reflexes. But we haven't seen his style in pure boxing. He's probably going to come forward and put as much pressure as he can on Logan Paul, walk him down. With Logan being such a big guy, you got to wonder, could he slow down in this fight? Could Dillon potentially take over later on? Dillon Danis really has to impose himself, get that respect early. Meanwhile, Logan Paul just has to stick to the fundamentals, the basics, the 1-2, the jab, and try to time him, try to counter him. He says he wants to get that knockout in this fight. Both guys have said that. Dillon Danis has had so much to say, and we've never seen him in the boxing ring. You got to wonder, how's he going to show up, and which Logan Paul's going to show up? How's he going to look? The first time that he's coming back into boxing for a couple years now. He's been in the WWE and he's been taking that more seriously. It's obviously a completely different competition. Dillon Danis versus Logan Paul was actually supposed to happen earlier this year, but Logan Paul had a knee injury in November, which put him out. Both these guys are actually coming off knee injuries, but I feel like that WWE experience could also help Logan Paul. Just being in front of crowds and performing, being a showman. He's an absolute athletic specimen. He does all kinds of stuff in the WWE. He's jumping off the top rope, doing frog splashes, doing the splits in midair. He's really taken to the WWE, which is where his main focus lies. It isn't in boxing right now, but he's doing it as these kind of one-off spectacles, and he says that he wants to be back in it, be back in the conversation, get some highlight reel knockouts. He's going to look to do that against Dillon Danis. He recently said that he's better than his brother Jake Paul, and he thinks that he's the best YouTube boxer out there. With the mind games of Dillon Danis, Logan could potentially even fight emotionally in this one, which I don't know if that hurts or helps him. This fight has already been a battle before the fight even happens itself. It's been mental warfare non-stop from both guys. Physically, I'd say Logan Paul has most of the advantages, probably hits a bit harder, has more pop to his punches, maybe a bit better footwork. But Dillon Danis is really an unknown figure. We don't know how he fights in boxing. We've seen a lot of MMA guys take up boxing, but each guy is different. Dillon Danis comes from a jiu-jitsu background, but he's still in his prime. He just turned 30 years old, and he still has his entire MMA career ahead of him if he actually still wants to pursue that, if he still wants to become a world champion, which he still says he wants to do, get underway with his MMA career and pursue it. But he's kind of getting caught up in these celebrity matchups against Logan Paul. But let's be honest, he's going to be making way more money fighting Logan Paul than fighting in MMA. This fight is personal on both sides. The press conference had all kinds of heated moments, talking about each other's parents, controversies, relationships, and someone is going to be reigning the victor on October 14th, unless it's a draw, or unless Dillon Danis doesn't show up, or unless Logan Paul doesn't show up. But if everything goes smoothly, we will have a winner declared on the prime card. The second half of the double main event between Logan Paul and Dillon Danis. Let me know who you got in this fight in the comments down below. And speaking of the Paul brothers, check out this video on Jake Paul's new style. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to smash that like button.